slaves. So why do that? But they don't, one of the problems with the leadership of the United States is that they are not visionaries. They don't think. It's just the short term and thinking constantly in terms of friends and enemies. Who's our friend? Who's our enemy? Which is not the way in which an intelligent political leadership in the Western world should operate. You have to ask the question, who are the enemies of the people in their own countries? What do people say in terms of friendship? Who are their enemies? Why do they vote for these people? That's a question they don't ask. So we have seen in recent years, after these attempts to defeat Hugo Chavez undemocratically, through coups d'etats, through strikes, failed, then a campaign of demonization began in the international media. And in fact, I discuss this at length in the first few chapters of my book, that this was a campaign not confined to the United States. This was a campaign which affected most, not all, but most of Europe as well. And it's really interesting. If you do, for my sins, in order to write this book, I had to go and read all this stuff, which was quite painful. But I did do it, and I found virtually the same arguments and the same language utilized by the New York Times, the Financial Times, the Economist, El País, Le Monde, Folha de Sao Paulo. All the press, including sections of the liberal press, essentially utilized the same language. Why? Because they feel threatened. They are not prepared to tolerate in this new global order even 10% diversity. The whole world has to be the same. And the whole argument which this turbocharged capitalism puts forward is that the reason globalization, the way we're carrying it out, is important is because it creates diversity. Like hell it does. Just look at the world. Where is it diverse? The only countries that are diverse and try to do something are attacked and demonized. And one of the ways in which they do this now, both fight wars and fight psychological wars, military wars in the Middle East, psychological wars and political wars and ideological wars against Latin America. For this, they need a big pillar, and that pillar is the media. The globalized media networks now provide that, which was not the case, by the way, during the Cold War. During the Cold War, the media, television as well as the print media, was permitted some space to have investigative journalism, to be critical. Why? Because at that time it was vital to show the citizens of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, in China and places, look, in our country the press is totally free, people can say this, people can attack the president, people can do whatever they want, but in your country it isn't. Since that world disappeared, they don't need to prove anything to anyone. So the entire system of media management and media manipulation has been tightened up. It's been tightened up, and increasingly space for dissident voices has virtually disappeared in the United States. In Europe, there are still a few possibilities, but in the United States, it's virtually disappeared. I mean, if you look at someone in this country who is a major figure, intellectual figure, whether you agree with him or you disagree with him is something else, but he is a major intellectual figure, Noam Chomsky. How often do you read Noam Chomsky in the New York Times? Once every 3 years? Usually they give him an op-ed piece once every 3 years. So it was very important that even on this small level, Hugo Chavez, in his United Nations speech, advised the American people to read a bit more Noam Chomsky. And you know what was surprising was not that Chavez said it, but that so many Americans followed his advice. because within 48 hours, Chomsky was top on the Amazon bestseller list, and within 2 weeks, he was number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list. And I sent him a note saying that, since I was always telling you about Chavez for many years and you wouldn't listen, I should get part of the commission. But anyway, but that is also interesting. And what is interesting about that is here is a demonized leader who comes to the United Nations, makes a very sharply critical speech of the US administration, but at the same time, in that speech, shows that he has enormous respect for American citizens, especially those citizens who are critical of the administration, and helps to promote a book which would otherwise not have got this profile. And it's quite astonishing, but what it also reveals is a deep unease within American society itself. And this unease is the result of long wars and occupations which have been fought. Because, traditionally the American empire does not like directly occupying countries. It's different from the European empires of the 20th and 19th and 20th centuries. The United States does not like occupying countries directly. They prefer to use their supporters in those countries to do the dirty work for them. And normally it works. And it still works in large parts of the world. So politically, psychologically, and in terms of their own history, they're no good at occupying countries. They don't know what to do once they've occupied them. And that creates problems, because the old empires had a plan. When the British or the French or the Germans, even the Italians, when they occupied a country, they had some sort of a plan of what they were going to do to that country and how long they were going to stay. The United States doesn't have that. And so the occupation of Iraq has now turned out to be a complete and total disaster for them. And they know it. The irony is that the principal opposition to this war, as far as the establishment is concerned, comes from the Pentagon, not from the political class. It's absolutely true. The same is true in Britain, where another country which is part of the occupation, where recently the commander-in-chief of the British Army, General Sir Mark Dannatt, made an extremely sharp critique of the government, said this war has gone wrong, the people don't want us there, and we have to get out as soon as possible. Of course, it took them 24 hours to give a spin on it and force him to change it, but the fact that he had said it in itself was very significant. And it's no secret here that the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs have been trying to get rid of Rumsfeld for the last 2 or 3 years. The only question now is whether he'll be got rid of before or after the midterm elections. But they will have to get rid of him if they're going to pull out and put someone else who carries out what the military want. Because this war has gone wrong in so many ways that it's painful to even describe it. The people of Iraq have lost nearly 750,000 people, citizens, since the occupation began. Massive figure. The country is in chaos. Anarchy rules. The social infrastructure has been destroyed. Nearly 1 million children don't go to school each day. And under the previous regime, whatever the problems of this regime were, and there were many, as I outlined in many of my writings, but this regime made sure that the state protected the social rights of its people. Everyone got an education. There were more educated women in Iraq than in any other Arab country. These women played a big role in education, in health, in virtually every level of society. All that has now been wiped out. And so the future of Iraq is very grim. But the future also of the soldiers who occupied it is very grim. because many of them, as has been published, are having nervous breakdowns, are suffering from traumas, are beginning to describe, both American and British soldiers, of what they were forced to do by the situation that they confronted, killings of civilians, mass rapes of women, torture. And that affects the psyche of a person who carries it out when this person returns to his or her own society after the war. And we haven't yet seen the end of the repercussions of this war, and we will not see them probably fully for another 5 or 6 years, the effects in the United States. And on this subject, it is, for someone like me, I was surprised when I read that in the United States now they have voted to legalize torture. Unbelievable. Unbelievable that they have done this with very little protest from the media, with very few demonstrations. But who are they going to be torturing? You know, we know that torture was widely taught in the School of the Americas and practiced in South America, not in the United States. Now they have legalized it so you can be tortured in the United States. And you know, you can have big debates then as to what constitutes torture. For Gonzales, unless 6 of your organs fail, you've not really been tortured properly. But for most people, torture starts at a very low level in any case. So these attacks on habeas corpus, on civil liberties, are incredible. And why are they doing it? Because the big boast after 9/11 of the president was, and this was a remark repeated endlessly in the media, by politicians, by editors, we must not allow these terrorists to change the way in which we live. But you have. You have. You live in a different way now because of all these laws that you've passed. So are we to say then that this is the victory of Osama bin Laden? That members of the Congress voted tamely to push through these laws? That's the question which people have to ask, and that is why there is unease in this country. People don't feel easy with themselves, and that is why they are interested in what is going on, or some people are interested in what is going on in the southern part of the American landmass. They are interested in it. That is why Chavez is demonized by the corporate media, and that is why even people who are critical of him are interested in him. Can't be said of many Latin American leaders in this country, because as you know, we know it's regarded as their backyard, and most American citizens wouldn't be able to name 6 Latin American capital cities if you ask them. So at least now they understand the geography of Venezuela, and what its capital city is called and what its president is called. And that is a step forward. Now, how is this process going to develop? And I think one important point which has been stressed by many Latin American leaders is that it needs to be a continental process. When I was last in Havana last year, some senior members I met from the Politburos told me a very interesting story. They said one question that Fidel really hates foreign journalists asking is, after Fidel, who? Because it's boring, it's a cliche, but also because Fidel says they don't understand the history of our continent. Why should a successor to Fidel come in Cuba? In other words, he sees himself rightly as a continental figure. That's how he is seen by most Latin Americans, even by those who don't like him, as one of the great leaders produced by that continent.